The sun beat down on the city park as Daniel sat on a worn wooden bench, unwrapping the only thing he had managed to pack for lunch, a simple sandwich with peanut butter and jelly. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep him going through his grueling shift at the construction site. His hands were rough and calloused, the lines of his face etched deeper from long days and even longer nights. Still, when he thought of his son Noah waiting at home, he found the strength to push through each day. As he chewed slowly, trying to make each bite last, he noticed a girl sitting a few feet away. She looked out of place. Her clothes weren't ragged, but she wasn't polished either. There was a quiet sadness about her, a nervous tapping of her fingers on her knees as she stared at the ground. Daniel could see it in her eyes when she glanced at his sandwich. She was hungry. He recognized that look instantly because he had worn it himself too many times. He hesitated for a moment. This was his only meal until dinner, and even dinner would just be whatever leftovers he and Noah could put together. But something about the girl, maybe the way she tried to hide her hunger, tugged at him. With a sigh, Daniel tore the sandwich in half and held it out toward her. "Hey," he said gently. "You look like you could use this more than me." Her eyes widened, surprised, as if no one had ever offered her something so simple yet so meaningful. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Daniel nodded with a reassuring smile. "Yeah, don't worry about me, I've had enough." The girl hesitated for only a moment before taking the sandwich. She bit into it quickly, like someone who hadn't eaten all day. Tears welled up in her eyes as she whispered, "Thank you. I was starving." Daniel just shrugged, as though it wasn't a big deal, though inside, he felt a small warmth. Sometimes we all need a little help. No shame in that. She looked at him curiously, as though trying to figure out why a stranger would be so kind. For the first time that day, a faint smile tugged at the corners of her lips. The next day, when Daniel came to the park for his lunch break, he was surprised to see the girl again. She sat on the same bench, this time waiting before he even arrived. He greeted her with a nod and sat down. "You came back," he said. She shrugged, almost sheepishly. "It's quiet here, easier to think." He pulled out another sandwich, this one hastily made with whatever bread and filling he could find that morning, and handed her half without saying a word. She accepted it, smiling more openly this time. Over the next week, it became a routine. Every day around lunchtime, she was there. Sometimes they ate in silence, sometimes they talked. Daniel learned her name was Emily. She was around 16 or 17, though she carried herself with the weariness of someone much older. She didn't talk much about her family, and Daniel didn't press. He figured she had her reasons. Instead, their conversations circled around simple things: Noah's antics at school, Daniel's stories from the construction site, the silly jokes he used to tell his late wife that always made her roll her eyes. Emily listened intently, her eyes brightening whenever he spoke about Noah. "You really do a lot for your son," she said one afternoon. Daniel chuckled softly. "Well, he's all I've got. Everything I do is for him. Some days it's hard, but he's worth every bit of it." There was something in his voice, a raw honesty, that struck Emily. In her world, people always seemed to want something, whether it was money, status, or favors. But Daniel was different. He wasn't performing or trying to impress her. He was just a father doing his best. One evening, as rain clouds rolled in, Emily appeared again, this time without a jacket or umbrella. She was soaked to the bone, shivering under the park's lone tree. Daniel frowned, standing up immediately. "You'll get sick out here. Come on, you can't sit in this weather." She shook her head nervously. "It's fine, I don't want to bother you." "You're already a bother if I walk away knowing you'll sit here freezing," he said firmly, though his tone was kind. "Let's go. You can dry off at my place." Reluctantly, she followed him. His apartment was small, just 2 rooms and a kitchen that smelled faintly of coffee and bread, but it was warm. Noah ran to the door, wrapping his little arms around his dad. "Who's this?" he asked curiously, peeking up at Emily. "This is Emily. She's a friend," Daniel explained. Emily smiled softly and crouched down to meet Noah's eyes. "Nice to meet you, buddy." They shared a simple dinner. Pasta with a bit of sauce, nothing fancy, but Emily ate as though it was a feast. She laughed when Noah showed her his drawings, and for the first time in a long while, Daniel saw her face light up. She looked less like a lonely girl in the rain and more like a kid who just wanted to belong somewhere. When she left later that evening, Daniel walked her out. He didn't notice the sleek black car parked down the street, or the suited man who opened the door for her as she slipped inside. All Daniel knew was that he had met a girl who needed kindness, and he had plenty to give, even if all he had was half a sandwich and a place at his dinner table. The next few days were brighter, even though Daniel was still buried in work and bills. Something about Emily's presence in his and Noah's small world made life feel less heavy. She didn't talk about herself much, but she laughed at Noah's jokes, helped him with his homework, and even stayed once to play a board game with them until it was late. For Daniel, who had been carrying the weight of single fatherhood alone since his wife passed, it was strangely comforting to have someone else at the table. Someone who didn't look at him with pity or judgment, just kindness in return. One afternoon, as he was finishing a long shift, Daniel saw Emily waiting in the park again. But this time, the weather had turned cruel, gray clouds gathered above, and a cold drizzle soaked the air. She sat huddled under the tree, no umbrella, her hair clinging to her face. "Emily," Daniel called out, jogging toward her. "What are you doing out here? You'll catch pneumonia." She forced a small smile. "I didn't want to miss seeing you guys." He shook his head and stripped off his work jacket, draping it around her shoulders. "That's it. You're coming home with me. No arguments." She hesitated, guilt flickering across her features, but his tone left no room for debate. A few minutes later, she was inside Daniel's modest apartment again, her shoes squeaking against the linoleum floor. Noah's eyes lit up when he saw her. "Emily," he shouted, racing over. "Come see the fort I built." She laughed, forgetting the cold, and followed him into the living room where blankets and pillows were stacked high into what looked like a small castle. She crawled inside with Noah, their laughter echoing through the apartment. Daniel stood by the kitchen counter, watching them with a quiet smile. He hadn't realized until now how much laughter had been missing from his home. It was as though Emily had brought a piece of it back. Later that evening, the three of them shared spaghetti, Daniel's go-to meal when money was tight. Emily ate heartily, savoring every bite. "You're a really good cook," she told him, which made him chuckle. "Don't let Noah fool you," Daniel replied. "He's the real chef. I just boil water." When it was time for Emily to leave, Daniel offered to walk her out. She declined quickly, almost too quickly, and slipped out the door. He thought nothing of it, assuming she just wanted privacy. But what he didn't see was the black car parked discreetly down the street, headlights dimmed. A chauffeur stepped out, holding an umbrella as Emily climbed inside, her face suddenly heavy again with secrets. For the next few days, Emily didn't show up at the park. Daniel found himself looking for her out of habit, carrying an extra sandwich in case she came. Noah asked about her constantly, wondering if she would come back to play. Daniel reassured him, though he wasn't sure himself. Then one evening, Daniel switched on the small TV in his kitchen, letting the news play as he cooked dinner. His eyes froze on the screen. There she was, Emily. But not the Emily he knew. The news anchor's voice rang out. 17-year-old Emily Carter, daughter of billionaire philanthropist Richard Carter, was seen attending a high-profile charity gala last night. The camera showed her stepping out of a limousine in a glittering dress, photographers flashing their cameras. She smiled gracefully, but Daniel recognized the same sadness in her eyes that she carried on the park bench. He nearly dropped the spoon in his hand. Billionaire's daughter, Emily Carter, his Emily. He sat down heavily, the truth sinking in. The girl he'd shared his sandwich with, the one who ate pasta at his kitchen table, wasn't some lost teenager. She was part of a world he couldn't even dream of belonging to. When Emily finally returned a few days later, Daniel was waiting. His emotions were tangled. Confusion, embarrassment, maybe even a little anger. "So, Emily Carter," he said quietly as she approached. She froze, guilt written all over her face. "You saw the news." "Yeah," Daniel replied. "Guess you're not just some kid from the park." Her voice shook as she spoke. "I didn't mean to lie. I didn't want you to see me as her. I'm tired of people only seeing my father's money. You were different. You treated me like, like a person. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, struggling with the swirl of emotions. I thought you were hungry. I thought you needed help. And all this time, he trailed off, shaking his head. Tears brimmed in her eyes. I did need help, not with money, but with something real. Do you know how lonely it feels to be surrounded by people who only care about what they can get from you? You and Noah, you didn't want anything from me. You gave me more than anyone else ever has. Her words hung in the air, raw and honest. For the first time, Daniel realized the truth. Despite the billions in her family's name, Emily had been starving for something he had in abundance: kindness, warmth, and the simple comfort of belonging. And though part of him still felt like a fool for not knowing who she was, another part of him knew she wasn't lying now. You should have told me, he said softly. I was scared you'd push me away, she whispered. Daniel exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing. Well, you're here now. That has to mean something. She smiled through her tears, and for a moment, the walls of wealth and poverty, billionaire and construction worker, disappeared. They were just Daniel, Emily, and Noah, three souls who had somehow found each other, bound together not by status but by a shared humanity. Richard Carter wasn't a man who left things to chance. Billionaire, businessman, and philanthropist, he was known for controlling everything and everyone in his orbit. So when he discovered that his daughter Emily had been sneaking away from their mansion to spend time with a stranger, his anger boiled over. One evening, Daniel opened his apartment door to find a tall man in an expensive suit standing there. His presence filled the small hallway. Behind him, Emily shifted nervously, her eyes darting between the two men. You must be Daniel, Richard said, his voice clipped and icy. The man who has been spending time with my daughter. Daniel squared his shoulders. And you must be her father. Richard's gaze swept over Daniel's modest home, lingering on the worn furniture and scuffed floors. I don't know what game you're playing, but let me be clear. My daughter is not a charity case, and she doesn't belong here. Daniel's jaw tightened. With respect, sir, no one here asked for your money or your approval. She came on her own. All I did was share a sandwich and treat her like a human being. Richard's eyes narrowed, unaccustomed to being spoken to so bluntly. Do you expect me to believe you didn't know who she was? That you weren't hoping for some benefit? Emily stepped forward, her voice breaking. Dad, stop. He never asked for anything. He didn't even know who I was. For once in my life, someone liked me for me, not for being a Carter. But Richard was unmoved. You're too young to understand. People always want something, Emily. Always. Daniel looked at the girl standing beside her father, then back at Richard. He wanted to lash out, to defend himself, but instead, he spoke calmly. Maybe that's true in your world. But in mine, all we have is each other. Sometimes all we can give is a sandwich, or a smile, or a little bit of kindness. That's all I had, and that's all I offered. If you think that makes me a threat, then maybe the problem isn't me. The silence that followed was heavy. Emily's eyes shimmered with tears, but there was pride in them too, pride for Daniel's courage. Richard finally turned away, his expression unreadable. Come, Emily, he said sharply. She hesitated, torn, before reluctantly following him out the door. The apartment felt emptier than ever that night. Noah asked softly, Dad, is Emily coming back? Daniel sighed, pulling his son close. I don't know, buddy. But sometimes people have to figure things out for themselves. Days turned into weeks. Daniel threw himself back into work, though his thoughts often drifted to Emily. He told himself it was over, that their worlds were too different. But deep down, he missed her laughter at his dinner table and the way she made his son smile. Then, one crisp Saturday morning, the knock on his door came. When he opened it, he froze. Standing there wasn't just Emily. It was Richard Carter himself. Richard looked different this time. His usual sternness was gone, replaced by something almost vulnerable. Emily stood beside him, her hand gripping his tightly, as though she had dragged him there against his will. I owe you an apology, Richard said, surprising Daniel. I misjudged you. Daniel didn't answer, waiting. Richard continued, his voice quieter now. Emily hasn't stopped talking about you and your son. About the night you shared your dinner. About the way you treated her. You gave her something I couldn't. with all my wealth, all my power. You gave her belonging, family. Emily squeezed her father's hand, her eyes shining with hope. Dad finally listened, she whispered. Daniel let out a long breath, some of the tension leaving his body. All I did was be kind. That's what people do when they care. Richard nodded slowly, and that's exactly what money can't buy. The moment hung between them, fragile and real. Then Noah burst into the room, his eyes widening when he saw Emily. You came back, he shouted, running to hug her. She laughed, hugging him tightly, as though she never wanted to let go again. Later that evening, they all sat together in the tiny living room. It was cramped, almost comically so for a man of Richard Carter's stature, but no one seemed to mind. They watched Noah's school play video on an old laptop, Emily clapping and cheering as if it were a Broadway performance. Richard sat quietly, observing the warmth around him. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about business deals or boardrooms. He was just a father, seeing his daughter truly happy. As the night wound down, Richard stood and extended his hand to Daniel. You've reminded me of something I forgot long ago, that humanity isn't measured in dollars, but in kindness. I don't know how to repay you. Daniel shook his hand firmly. You don't need to. Just let her be herself. That's all she ever wanted. Emily beamed at them both, her heart full. For her, the richest moments weren't in the mansion or at glittering galas. They were here, in this small apartment, with pasta dinners, blanket forts, and a man who shared his last sandwich without expecting anything in return. As Richard and Emily left that night, Noah tugged on Daniel's sleeve. Dad, he whispered, you always say a sandwich isn't much. But I think your sandwich changed everything. Daniel smiled, his eyes misty, pulling his son close. Yeah, buddy, sometimes the smallest things make the biggest difference. And in that quiet moment, Daniel realized the truth. His kindness had built a bridge between worlds that were never meant to meet. And though he didn't have money or fame, he had something far greater, a story of compassion that would live on in the hearts of everyone it touched. For Emily, it was the beginning of a life where she could finally be free to love and be loved without conditions. For Richard, it was a reminder that even a billionaire's world was empty without simple human connection. And for Daniel and Noah, it was proof that their kindness had the power to change not just one life, but many. Because sometimes, all it takes is half a sandwich to change the world.